Well, she was also well, she was an immigrant. She was a first generation Irish, but her mother and dad were immigrants, and they met on the ship coming over from Ireland about 1895, somewhere in that area, give or take a couple of years. They met on the ship coming over here. My grandmother had a job in New York, a sponsor, in other words, that she had a place to go when she got here. My dad was, or my grandfather was a ship afloat out of the water, and so they agreed to meet later on when he got established. So she gave him her name and address and I guess phone number of where she was going to be, she'd be waiting for him, and he lost it. And about a year later, he was wearing a suit that he had worn before, and he felt something crinkling in his pocket, but there was nothing in his pocket. So he investigated, and it was down in behind the lining of his pocket, and there, a year later, was Bessie's name and address. Whether she was still waiting or not, he didn't know. I guess it was probably 2 years later. Quite a while anyhow. And so he wrote her, and she was still waiting, wondering what in the world had happened to James. He was long over. He was like, I'm named for my grandfathers, both of them. My mother's grandfather's name was James, and my father's father was named Carl. So I'm James Carl for my two grandfathers.
I guess I didn't know that. Okay. So she was.
And then the rest is history. They got together and got married and had.
How'd they end up in Illinois from New York?
They didn't end up in Illinois. They ended up in the Dells in Wisconsin. They went to Lake Forest first, Lake Forest, Illinois.
So they were in Illinois.
Yeah, they were in Illinois. They lived there a couple of years, and their house burnt to the ground. And they probably had at least one child at that time, maybe two. They moved to the Dells and started farming up there. He ended up, I don't know where he got the money, I really don't. He ended up with 300 acres up there. Of course, land was much cheaper then than it is now, but it still was, yeah, it was still relevant. I mean, it was still high by their standards. And so they ended up on the farm, and of course they needed help working the farm, so they had 9 kids. They lost 2, but stillborn. Dairy farm.
A lot of cows.
A lot of cows, yeah, or a whole herd of cows, 20 cows. But they milked them all by hand, because they didn't have electricity and nor modern milking technology. I think they had oats and pasture and hay. They made their own hay. Raise their own grain. So, spent their life milking cows. That's why I think one of the reasons I decided I'd never be a dairy farmer. Farm life would be nice, but not dairy. Anything but dairy. That's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. No time out at all.
So was the farm still working when you were a kid?
Oh sure. Every summer my mother and I would drive up to the farm.
Did you like the farm as a
Oh yeah, it was fun. That was fun.
Tell me a little bit about spending time with your uncles.
Oh, they were hard drinkers and hard partiers. Of course, they didn't drink all the time, but when they did, they'd rather fight and drink than anything else. They had such a reputation that they'd go to town. The 5 brothers go to town on a Saturday night. The first bar they'd go into would quick telephone all the rest of them. And look out, the Gahan boys are in town. Yeah, terrible. That's why my mother was such a teetotaler. She just absolutely hated the thought of my ever taking a drink, because one drink made you an alcoholic in her mind. You know? Yeah. Which of course it doesn't. But.
And how about your aunts? How were they like?
The only one I ever saw much of was my Aunt Elizabeth. She lived in Illinois, in Chicago, helped run a Japanese restaurant there, 816 North Clark Street. rather poor side of town, but it was middle. wasn't real bad. wasn't real highbrow. They would come out to the countries where we lived. Oh golly, a couple of times a month anyhow. She was in partnership with a Japanese man.
So he would come out to the house?
Yes, he would come out too, and they had a Filipino that worked in the restaurant. I forget what he was, maitre d' probably, or one of the supervisor, and he would drive.
Oh, okay.
He'd drive him out.
It's kind of the strings along.
Yeah, it was quite a quite a lineup. Neither my aunt nor the Japanese man drove, and yet my aunt owned the car. She bought a new Chevrolet every other year.
But she didn't drive.
She never drove a day in her life, not 1 mile.
Oh, that's funny.
She paid $600 every 2 years for a new car.
For rent. So she could come out and see her sister.
Yeah, that was it. When you stop and think about it, it was kind of strange, but we just took it as the way it was, you know.
Yeah, when you grew up that way.
Yeah, it wasn't strange at all. It's the way it was.
How long did she stay in Chicago?
Oh golly, 10 years probably, maybe more. I really never thought much about it. She was there. Well, I was there. We were there the night the war broke out, 1941. And I was there the night that they came and took the Japanese man away, locked him up because he was Japanese, impounded him.
Did she run it for him while he was gone?
Mm-hmm.
How long was he gone?
Till the war ended. Several years.